I remember the night the letter arrived, rain hammering against the window like it was trying to warn me. There was a sharp knock at the door, and when I opened it, a soaked messenger handed me an envelope that felt heavier than it should. The return address was a law firm I had never heard of, and the wax seal carried a strange symbol I didn't recognize. I knew immediately that this wasn't ordinary mail. Something about it made my stomach tighten, a familiar unease crawling up my spine. Inside, the paper was thick and yellowed, the ink formal and cold. It told me that I had inherited the Corbian estate. At first I laughed nervously, thinking it must be some mistake. I hadn't seen my father in years, and the family name barely meant anything to me. But then I noticed the fine print, a warning, subtle and almost hidden in the text, hinting at a legacy no one dared speak of. The words whispered in a way that felt alive, tugging at some dormant fear I didn't fully understand. As I read, memories I had long buried surfaced, fragments of conversations with my father, hushed and fearful. He had never been clear about why he avoided the Corbins, only that some things were better left alone. I could feel the anxiety building in my chest, a tight, clawing sensation. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the roof, and the shadows in my apartment seemed to stretch toward me, as if eager to hear my thoughts. I ran my fingers over the envelope again, tracing the symbol, and a shiver ran down my spine. There was something wrong here. I could feel it in every nerve. It wasn't just the weight of the estate, or the strangeness of the letter. It was the feeling that accepting this inheritance might be stepping into a trap set long before I was born. My father's warnings echoed in my mind, and I realized I had been naive to ignore them all these years. By the time I set the letter down, my hands were trembling, and a cold draft crept across my shoulders. I kept staring at that envelope, wondering if opening it had already changed something, set something in motion I couldn't stop. Outside, the rain softened, but the feeling didn't fade. Something was waiting for me, patient and silent, just beyond the walls of my reality. And I knew with a sinking certainty that my life had just become a question I wasn't ready to answer. I remember the road to Holleridge like it was stretching endlessly, each mile dragging me closer to a past I had tried to forget. The fog clung to the hills, curling around trees like slow fingers, and the air smelled damp and earthy, thick with something older, heavier. Every time I passed a familiar landmark, a flash of memory hit me, a corner of a playground, the edge of a forgotten garden, and it felt like someone watching from just beyond the mist. The town seemed smaller than I remembered, yet somehow sharper, more angular. Windows stared at me like dark eyes, and doors felt closed not just physically, but in warning. People passed by on the streets, casting brief glances my way, eyes flickering with recognition and fear. I caught fragments of whispers, words I couldn't fully hear, but the tone was clear. There was caution there, almost reverence, as if the name Corbin carried weight too heavy to speak aloud. Anxiety pooled in my stomach, and I realized I hadn't left the town entirely behind in my mind. It had been waiting, patient and quiet, for my return. As the road curved, the Corbin estate came into view. The house sat atop a rise like a sentinel, dark and looming against the foggy sky. Its silhouette was jagged, the windows staring down like hollow eyes, and I felt a pull toward it that I couldn't explain. At the same time, a part of me recoiled, warning me to stop, to turn back, to leave this place alone. My father's warnings echoed faintly, a whisper in the back of my mind that I could not ignore. The closer I got, the more the house seemed alive. Branches scraped against the windows, the wind sighed through broken gutters, and shadows moved in ways that did not match the light. The air grew colder, biting at my cheeks and hands. My pulse raced, a mix of fear and something else, something I couldn't name, as if the estate itself was testing me, gauging my resolve. By the time I reached the gate, I was trembling, my thoughts scattered between disbelief, dread, and curiosity. The ironwork was rusted, twisting into shapes that seemed almost purposeful, a silent message from generations long gone. I hesitated, hand hovering over the latch, aware that passing this point was not just a step into the yard, but a crossing into a world that had been waiting for me for decades. And then, as I pushed the gate open, a shiver ran down my spine, and I felt it, a presence, patient and silent, waiting just beyond the threshold, watching me come home. The moment I stepped into the Corbin mansion, the door creaked behind me, and I felt it close, like a trap. The air was thick, almost solid, carrying the smell of old wood and dust that had settled over decades. My footsteps echoed loudly, each one swallowed by shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should. The house waited, silent but alive, and I realized that it had been expecting me. Portraits lined the walls, staring down with eyes that seemed to follow every movement. Each face carried a judgment I couldn't shake, as if they knew secrets I was only beginning to uncover. Their expressions were solemn, sometimes stern, always unyielding, and I felt a shiver run from my neck to my fingertips. The air pressed against my chest, making it harder to breathe, as though the house itself was aware of my intrusion. I ran my hand along the banister, feeling the roughness of aged wood, and tried to dismiss the whispers I thought I heard. Soft at first, almost polite, but growing sharper in the corners of my mind. I paused, listening. They didn't come from anywhere specific, yet I could swear someone or something was moving just beyond my sight. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold bead of sweat slide down my temple. The grand hall stretched above me, ornate but decaying. Sunlight tried to pierce the grime on the tall windows, but it barely reached the floor. Dust motes hung suspended in the weak light, drifting slowly like forgotten memories. I imagined the footsteps of ancestors pacing the halls long before me, their lives folded into the fabric of this place, and somehow their presence lingered, patient and watching. I moved deeper, drawn to a staircase that wound upward, each step groaning under my weight. The silence pressed harder as I ascended, and the whispers grew, almost forming words I couldn't quite understand. My hands trembled as I brushed against the walls, noticing cracks and faded wallpaper that hinted at long-forgotten tragedies. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down, heavy and relentless. When I finally reached the top, I paused in a long corridor. The air colder here than below. It felt alive, as if the house remembered everything that had happened within its walls, everything that had been hidden. And in that moment, I understood something I could not explain. This house was not just waiting for me to arrive. It had been waiting to judge me, to watch me, to test me. And then, in the far corner of the hallway, I thought I saw a shadow move against the wall, stopping abruptly, as if whatever it was had noticed me too. I didn't notice the portraits at first. Not really. They hung along the walls like silent witnesses, their frames heavy with dust and time. But as I moved closer, something about the eyes caught me. They seemed empty, hollow, staring past me, yet somehow seeing me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my stomach tightened. Each painting had a small plaque beneath it, and as I read the names and dates, a pattern began to emerge. Every firstborn child of the Corbin family was recorded, and their lives ended abruptly, some vaguely described, some just a date. I couldn't look away. There was a rhythm to the tragedy, a repetition that made my head swim. The faces were all different ages, some children, some barely older than I had been when I last visited Holleridge, but the expression was always the same, a haunting stillness, as though the moment captured was not just a likeness, but a memory of fear or sorrow, or something far worse. Guilt pressed against me, heavy and inexplicable, as if I was meant to belong among them, yet somehow had escaped. My pulse pounded, and I felt sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Shadows shifted in the corners of my vision, subtle at first, like the edge of a storm moving just beyond reach. I blinked, and they were gone, only to return when I turned my head. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, the result of exhaustion and anxiety, but the unease wouldn't leave. The air grew colder, carrying a faint scent of something metallic, like old blood, and I realized I was holding my breath. I stepped closer to one portrait in particular, a boy whose eyes were impossibly dark, almost sucking the light from the room. The plaque beneath him only had a name and a date, but I felt a pull, a tugging at my mind and chest, as though he was trying to tell me something he could not speak aloud. I shook my head, trying to escape the sensation, but every painting seemed to lean forward, the shadows deepening, the eyes watching. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard a whisper, soft and fleeting, just enough to make me spin around, only to see empty hallway. My heart raced. I knew then that the house wasn't just keeping the portraits, it was keeping the dead, and somehow they were aware I was here, moving unseen, waiting for me to notice them. As I stepped back, the last plaque caught my eye, the most recent firstborn, dated just a year before my return, and for a moment I thought I saw the eyes blink. The attic was colder than the rest of the house, the kind of cold that settles into your bones. I remember the stairs groaning under my weight, each step echoing into the shadows above. Dust hung in the air, thick and dry, and the smell of old wood mixed with something sharper, metallic, like iron or old blood. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing stacks of forgotten trunks and furniture draped in yellowed sheets, their shapes strange and menacing in the flickering light. I was searching for anything that might explain the Corbin curse, and my hands brushed over a loose floorboard near the far wall. When I lifted it, I found a small leather-bound diary, worn and cracked with age. My fingers trembled as I opened it, revealing a neat, cramped handwriting that belonged to my grandfather. The first words made me pause. The entry spoke of shadows that fed on firstborns, of rituals performed to keep some ancient promise, of blood spilled in secret rooms. I read on, disbelief gnawing at me. The pages described ceremonies, symbols etched into the walls, chants in a language I did not know but somehow understood in my bones. There were warnings too, vague yet terrifying, urging the next firstborn to avoid temptation, to resist what had been done to generations before. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I realized with a sinking dread that I was that firstborn, the one the diary had been waiting for. A cold draft whispered across my neck as I turned page after page, each entry darker than the last. My grandfather had written about fear, about guilt, about the way the house seemed alive, aware, hungry. I shivered, imagining the shadows in the corners of the attic reaching for me, patient and silent. The thought made me pull my jacket tighter, the leather scraping against the paper in a sound far too loud in the quiet room. For the first time, I felt the weight of the Corbin legacy pressing down on me, a presence I could not see but could feel everywhere. Each word of the diary seemed to echo the warning my father had whispered years ago, something I had tried to ignore. I was trapped in a story that had begun long before my birth, written in fear and blood, and I couldn't tell where the past ended and my own life began. When I finally closed the diary, I noticed a mark on the last page, a symbol that matched the seal on the letter I had received. A cold realization sank in, leaving me staring into the shadows of the attic, certain that whatever haunted the Corbins had been waiting for me all along, and now it was awake. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the house settling, a soft scratching, almost like fingernails running along the walls, barely audible over the wind outside. I froze, listening, and the sound stopped, as suddenly as it began. I told myself I was imagining it, that old houses made noises like this all the time. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the house. Later that night, as I lay in a room too large and too dark, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the floor above me. My pulse quickened. I could hear the boards creaking, the sound shifting closer, then retreating. I held my breath, convinced that if I moved, I would be caught. A whisper brushed against my ear, soft enough that I couldn't make out the words, but cold and insistent. My skin prickled, and I realized I hadn't felt truly alone in this house since I stepped inside. The noises grew bolder, scratches turned into thuds, whispers became murmurs, almost voices speaking to me, warning me, calling me. I began pacing the rooms, trying to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. The house was responding to me, changing with my presence. Every door, every shadow seemed alive, shifting when I wasn't looking. I could feel it watching, learning, almost enjoying the fear that bubbled inside me. Sleep became impossible. I would sit in the dark, listening, straining to understand what the voices wanted, my mind teetering on the edge of obsession. Each sound was a puzzle, each whisper a message I could not fully grasp. Fear began to twist into something darker, almost addictive. I wanted to know what the house was, what it had kept hidden for generations. I wanted to hear more, even as it terrified me. Sometimes I could swear I heard footsteps following me, echoing mine, though no one was there. Sometimes a scratch would appear right above me, in the ceiling, or along the wall I had just passed. I touched the walls, expecting to feel a draft or a hidden door, but there was nothing. Still, I could not shake the sensation that the house itself was conscious, breathing, waiting, patient and cruel. By dawn, the noises receded, leaving a strange silence, as though the mansion had paused, satisfied with the night's game. But I knew it was only temporary. I could feel it lingering, just out of sight, listening, waiting for the next moment. I let my guard down, and I understood, with a shiver that went straight to my bones, that the house would not stop until I truly belonged to it. The fog was thick that morning, hanging low over the trees like a living curtain. I found myself drawn to the overgrown path leading to the Corbin family cemetery, as if something invisible was pulling me forward. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Each step I took pressed down on roots and fallen leaves, muffling my footsteps, but the silence felt wrong, too complete, like the forest itself was holding its breath. When I finally reached the cemetery, the gates were rusted, almost hidden by ivy and brambles. I pushed through, feeling a shiver run up my spine. The stones were old, some cracked and leaning, covered in moss, yet each bore a name and date that made my stomach turn. The graves of the firstborn stretched back for centuries, their markers forming a pattern I couldn't immediately understand. Symbols were etched into the stones, strange shapes that repeated in ways that hinted at rituals I couldn't fully comprehend. I ran my fingers over the carvings, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. A cold wind brushed across my neck, and I thought I heard faint whispers just beyond my hearing. The sensation was undeniable, as though unseen eyes were tracking my every movement, waiting for me to see something I wasn't meant to. The hair on my arms rose, and I took a slow, shallow breath, trying to steady my nerves. The ground was uneven, and I stumbled over roots and forgotten gravestones. Shadows moved oddly in the fog, stretching and twisting, making the cemetery feel alive, as if the dead themselves were shifting under the soil to watch me. Each name I read seemed to weigh heavier on me, and I realized that generations of firstborns had shared the same fate. Their stories carved not just into stone but into the air around me, into the land itself. I felt a pull toward the oldest section, where the markers were barely legible. There was a sense of inevitability, as if stepping closer was something I had been preparing for my whole life. The fog thickened, clinging to my clothes and hair, pressing against my chest. I had the unnerving sense that the past and present were converging, that the line between the living and the dead was thinning, and that the cemetery was judging me, testing me, daring me to see what lay beneath. When I reached the oldest grave, I noticed a small, fresh mark etched into the stone, almost like a warning, almost like a welcome, and in that moment a chill ran through me, and I felt them, the Corbin firstborns, watching, waiting, and knowing I had finally arrived. I wasn't prepared for what I saw in the mirror. The corridor was dim, lit only by a single flickering sconce, the walls stretching into shadows that seemed to breathe. I caught my reflection, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Then it moved differently than I did, ever so slightly, a delay that made my stomach twist. My reflection smiled when I didn't, blinked when my eyes stayed wide, and I froze, heart hammering. The air felt colder here, heavier somehow, pressing against my chest. I could smell the faint metallic tang of old wood mixed with something acrid, like burnt candles. The corridor felt too long, too narrow, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. Each step I took toward the mirror was cautious, hesitant, but my reflection mirrored nothing I did. I felt a creeping sense of panic, a shiver running up my spine, as though invisible fingers grazed my neck. Then I heard it, soft at first, a whisper curling around the edges of my mind. "Your time will come," it said, each word deliberate, low, impossible to locate. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. Empty but for the shadows and the faint flicker of light. My pulse raced, every muscle in my body tight, and yet I felt drawn back to the mirror. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Something in that reflection was alive, something patient, aware, and it was waiting for me to notice. I reached out tentatively, fingers hovering over the cold glass, and my reflection did the same, but then its hand pressed firmly against the surface, as if testing a boundary, daring me to cross it. A rush of heat or cold, I couldn't tell which, shot through me. I stumbled backward, and for a heartbeat the corridor seemed to expand, swallowing the light, swallowing the sound. My breath came fast, shallow, and I realized that the house was no longer just a building. It was a living thing, responding to my fear, learning my movements, shaping the shadows to its will. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that exhaustion and isolation were playing tricks on my mind. But the whisper returned, louder, insistent, insidious, threading through my thoughts. "Your time will come." The words lingered in the air like smoke, a promise and a threat both. I tore my eyes from the mirror and stumbled down the corridor, heart pounding, every sense alert. But I knew the truth. Whatever waited in that glass was patient. It had been watching me long before I arrived, and it would wait as long as it needed. I keep seeing flashes of my childhood, fragments that rise unbidden, like shards of broken glass cutting through my mind. My father's voice echoes in them, low and urgent, warning me about the Corbins, but always vague, never complete. I remember the way he would frown, his hands clenching, and the sudden tension in the air whenever he spoke their name. I never understood it as a child, but now, standing in the shadowed halls of the estate, I can feel the weight of his fear. Some memories are bright, others hazy, like smoke curling at the edges of light. I see him pacing the kitchen floor, whispering, telling me to be careful, to stay away, yet I never asked the right questions. I wonder now if he knew, if he had glimpsed the curse before my birth, and if he had tried, in his own way, to shield me from it. Every glance, every pause in his sentences carries meaning I never grasped until tonight. The estate seems to pull at these memories, blending past and present. I walk down the grand corridor, and suddenly a vision of my father flashes before me, leaning against the railing, a look of hopelessness on his face. It feels as though he is here, guiding me, warning me still, though I know it is impossible. My chest tightens with guilt. I realize I ignored the hints, the subtle urgings, the unspoken rules he tried to instill. Shadows lengthen around me, brushing the corners of my vision, and I feel the house watching, testing, echoing his unspoken warnings. The diary, the whispers, the portraits, they all make sense in fragments now, pieces of a puzzle I am only beginning to see. Each clue points to a fate I thought I controlled, yet perhaps it was always predetermined, written into the bloodlines and walls that surrounded me. I stumble back to a window, the fog pressing against the glass, and the reflection I see is not just my own. It is the child I once was, frightened and unprepared, and the man my father tried to shape through warnings and fear. A deep sorrow settles over me, mingling with a sense of inevitability. For the first time I understand the truth of his vagueness. He could not fight what was coming. He could only prepare me, in small, fractured ways, for the legacy I now face. And as I stand there, memories colliding with reality, I realize that the guilt I feel is more than mine. It is shared across generations, a burden passed down from father to son, from firstborn to firstborn. The house seems to sigh around me, almost approvingly, and I know that nothing will be the same again. I found it by accident, a door half hidden behind a tapestry in the east wing. The wood was ancient, warped with age, the keyhole rusted and stubborn. My hands trembled as I pressed against it, feeling a vibration beneath my fingers, almost like a heartbeat. When I finally forced it open, the hinges groaned in protest, and a musty, cold air rushed out, carrying a smell of decay, dust, and something darker I couldn't name. The room had clearly been untouched for decades. Dust lay thick on the floor, and cobwebs clung to every corner, swaying gently as if the house itself exhaled when the door opened. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing shelves lined with objects that made my stomach twist. There were old toys, tattered clothing, and small trinkets, each labeled with names I recognized from the portraits and grave markers of the firstborns. Every item felt charged, as if it held a memory or a fragment of life snatched too soon. Symbols were etched into the walls, crude yet deliberate, spiraling and intersecting in ways that spoke of rituals and intent. The air was heavy, pressing against my chest, making each breath feel shallow. I noticed the faint scent of incense, long extinguished but lingering, and the faint metallic tang of dried blood on some of the markings. It was a shrine to the curse, a physical record of generations, a proof that what I had feared was real and persistent. I moved slowly, touching the objects, careful not to disturb the order. Each artifact seemed to whisper to me, telling a story of fear and obedience, of lives cut short before they had begun. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing that this room had been waiting for me, as if it knew I would come and understand. The curse wasn't just history. It was present, active, and it had my name written into its cycle. My reflection, in a tarnished mirror on the wall, startled me. For a heartbeat I saw, not just myself, but faint, shadowy figures behind me, firstborns whose lives had ended long ago, watching, waiting, expecting. The realization hit me hard. I was the culmination of a long, unbroken chain, the next in a pattern that spanned centuries. I stepped back, heart pounding, feeling the weight of every ancestor who had come before. The room seemed to pulse with intent, a living record of suffering and ritual, aware of my presence, and ready. And in that instant, I understood something I could not escape. This chamber was not just a secret of the past. It was a warning for the living, and I had walked straight into it. I woke to a cold draft brushing across my face, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I saw it, a shadow at my window, shifting and formless, yet unmistakably there. I froze, unable to breathe, as the darkness outside seemed to thicken, pressing against the glass. My name drifted on the wind, soft and sibilant, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten and my stomach knot. The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were inching closer, the ceiling lower. The floorboards creaked under my careful movements, yet the figure did not stir, remaining a dark silhouette framed by the pale moonlight. I strained to see details, but the shadow blurred and wavered, like smoke caught in a draught. Every instinct screamed to run, but something deeper rooted me in place, a fascination I could not resist. I listened to the whisper again, closer this time, almost inside my head. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away. I wanted to call out, to demand it leave, yet the words caught in my throat. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and old smoke, a scent that reminded me of the graveyard beyond the trees. I realized with a chill that it wasn't just outside. It was in the house, woven into the shadows, alive in the corners I could not see. I moved toward the window, trying to catch a better look, but the figure melted into the darkness when I approached. The wind carried my name again, urgent, almost impatient, as if the house itself was speaking through it. I could feel the pulse of the walls, the creak of beams, the low moan of the house settling, all conspiring to keep me on edge. Sleep felt impossible, my body tense, mind racing, haunted by the sense that I was being observed, studied. Hours passed in a blur of fear and anticipation. Every noise, the tap of rain against the glass, the rustle of the curtains, the distant groan of the mansion became amplified, a threat. I wanted to convince myself it was imagination, yet instinct told me otherwise. The shadow had been patient, waiting for the right moment, and I knew it had not gone away. By dawn, the window was empty, the house quiet again, but I felt its presence lingering, coiled and patient. I understood, with a cold certainty, that the night visitor had returned to remind me, nothing here is mine alone, and whatever watches will not rest until it has its due. Holleredge feels smaller at night, its streets narrow and empty, yet heavy with the weight of memories I don't fully understand. I sought out the town's historian, a recluse named Mr. Ainsley, who lived at the edge of the village, in a house that seemed older than time itself. The moment I stepped inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of paper, parchment curling in stacks around the room. He looked up, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows, and I felt immediately that he knew why I had come. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word could summon ghosts. "The Corbins," he began, "have always carried a curse. Every firstborn, without exception, has met the same fate. The villagers tried to intervene generations ago, hoping to stop it, but they failed, and each attempt only confirmed what the family already feared." His voice trembled slightly, betraying memories he had long buried. I leaned forward, heart pounding, listening to stories that had been whispered for centuries. He described a pattern: strange deaths, sudden illnesses, disappearances that were hushed and unspoken. Every time the firstborn reached a certain age, the shadow of the curse fell upon them. The villagers had tried to protect, to fight, but the Corbin bloodline seemed impervious, sealed by something darker, older than memory. "What did they do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They made a pact," he said, glancing at me sharply. "Something ancestral, something binding. No one knows the details now. It was meant to secure the family's power, their name, but at a terrible cost. You, of course, are next in the line, though you might not see it yet. You should leave, while you still can." The air felt colder, and I noticed the shadows in the corners of the room shifting, as if reacting to his words. My pulse raced, and a creeping sense of dread wrapped around me like fog. The historian's warnings were urgent but measured, as if he feared drawing the curse closer simply by speaking of it. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, yet the heaviness in my chest told me otherwise. I left his house with the smell of old paper clinging to my clothes, and the streets felt haunted, each shuttered window a pair of eyes watching me, judging, waiting. Holleredge had been a quiet town, but now every step echoed with the weight of secrets, every whisper seemed tied to the tragedies of the past. As I walked away, I realized something chilling. The town itself was alive with memory, with fear, and no matter how far I went, the shadow of the Corbins would follow. The historian's last words burned in my mind. "Leave," he said, but I knew that I couldn't. I never expected a simple genealogy search to feel like stepping into a grave. The moment I began tracing the Corbin lineage, a chill ran through me, and I realized I was not just looking at names and dates, I was staring at a tapestry of deaths. Each firstborn, stretching back centuries, met the same inexplicable fate. Violent, sudden, or mysterious, their ends were recorded with a cold precision that made my skin crawl. The names blurred together as I scrolled through records, birth certificates, and obituaries. Each entry had the same unsettling cadence: life beginning, promises unfulfilled, and then an abrupt, haunting conclusion. England, France, the Americas. The pattern spanned continents, and in every place, the story repeated itself. I felt like I was reading a horror novel, but it was all real, threaded through history, and the closer I looked, the more I could see the threads leading straight to me. I sank back into my chair, heart racing, fingers trembling. Every name, every date, every death felt like a warning, a proof that the Corbin curse was not superstition but an inheritance. The more I studied, the more I felt the inevitability pressing down on me. I was not outside the pattern. I was the next point on the line, the culmination of centuries of suffering. A cold sense of destiny wrapped around me, tightening like a vice. Photos of the firstborns stared back from yellowed pages, pale faces frozen in time, eyes wide as if in silent terror. Their expressions mirrored my own fear, the same shock and confusion that I had felt upon entering the mansion, upon seeing the portraits, upon reading the diary. It was as if their lives, their deaths, and their unspoken warnings were encoded into me, waiting to manifest. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of blood and history in my veins, a pull that was impossible to resist. I understood, with a terrifying clarity, that this was more than coincidence. It was inheritance, a line drawn in suffering and shadow. The curse was not just around me, it was inside me, and every heartbeat echoed the rhythm of those who came before. When I opened my eyes again, the room seemed smaller, the walls closer. The air carried a whisper of cold and decay, and I sensed the eyes of my ancestors watching. I could almost feel the pull of inevitability guiding me forward, each step heavier than the last. I realized that understanding the bloodline was no relief. It was a revelation of the destiny I could not escape. And in that instant, I knew with bone-deep certainty the story of the firstborn was not over. It was waiting for me. The letters arrived in a faded box, hidden behind a loose panel in the library. I hadn't expected them, and the moment I opened it, a shiver ran down my spine. The paper was brittle, smelling of mildew and time, ink faded to brown. As I read, I realized these were not just family correspondences, they were confessions, fragments of a past filled with deception, betrayal, and unspoken sins. One after another, the letters detailed arguments over inheritance, secret alliances and jealousies that had festered for decades. Cousins turning against cousins, parents deceiving children, vows broken in silence. It became painfully clear that the curse was not merely a supernatural force, but intertwined with the very human failings of the Corbins. Greed, envy, and betrayal had been passed down like a poisonous heirloom, feeding the darkness that claimed each firstborn. I felt a tight knot in my chest, guilt gnawing at me. The weight of the past pressed down, heavy and unrelenting, as though their mistakes were mine to carry. I could almost hear the whispers of the ancestors, accusing, demanding, blaming, and it made my hands tremble. Every letter painted a picture of a family fractured by mistrust, yet bound together by something far more sinister than mere blood. The more I read, the more the connections became horrifyingly clear. Each death of a firstborn seemed to coincide with a betrayal, small at first, then increasingly severe, until it erupted in tragedy. The patterns were unmistakable, a web of human flaws feeding the relentless curse. My mind spun with the implications. I was not just an observer of this legacy, I was part of it, tied to sins committed long before I was born. I set the letters aside, feeling the room close in around me. Dust motes floated in the beam of my lamp, and the house felt almost alive, as if it understood the knowledge I now carried. A cold draught whispered along the walls, carrying the faintest echo of voices I could not place. I realized that uncovering these truths did not free me. It bound me tighter, made me more aware of the inevitability pressing down. For the first time, I understood the full horror of the Corbin lineage. The curse was not just death. It was the weight of betrayal, of ancestral sins repeating themselves through blood. And as I sat there trembling, I knew that the house, the family, and the shadows of the past were watching me, waiting for my next move. The letters had revealed everything, yet left one terrifying certainty: there was no escape from what had already begun. The garden is a tangled mass of weeds and overgrowth, the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves filling my lungs as I step cautiously between the twisted branches. Moonlight struggles through the thick canopy, casting fractured shadows that twitch and shift with the wind. That's when I see it, a small figure, barely more than a silhouette, standing among the tall grass. At first I think it's a trick of the shadows, but it moves, beckoning me with a pale hand. My heart pounds in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. The figure resembles a child, yet something about it feels wrong, distorted, as if the air around it carries the weight of grief and malice. I want to turn away, but an irresistible pull drives me forward, each step hesitant, sinking into the damp soil. The garden seems to stretch, twisting, as if guiding me towards some hidden truth I am not ready to face. The air thickens, heavy with an almost tangible dread. I smell the faint coppery scent of blood, though the ground is untouched, and a shiver runs down my spine. Whispers brush against my ears, soft and urgent, impossible to place, warning, invitation, or threat. I cannot tell. I stumble toward the place the figure indicates, the grass parting like hands trying to hold me back, and my imagination fights reality, questioning if I am awake, dreaming, or falling into something older and darker. Then the ground rises slightly, a mound hidden beneath the ivy and moss. I kneel, hands trembling as I brush the leaves aside, revealing the top of a grave. The soil is freshly turned, oddly warm, and the faint impression of tiny feet pressed into the earth makes my stomach knot. The childlike figure fades into shadow, but I feel its presence linger, watching, waiting. A breeze carries its whispered warning, a sound I cannot shake. Your time is closer than you think. Panic mixes with fascination as I glance around the garden. Every twisted branch seems alive, every shadow a sentient observer, and I realize the line between hallucination and haunting reality is gone. My pulse races, my breathing shallow, and I feel the weight of the curse pressing down like the dense night air. I stand, hands muddy, unable to move my gaze from the grave. The garden, once a place of decay and neglect, now feels like a stage set for a revelation I am not prepared to witness. The presence of that figure, whether spirit or omen, tells me one thing with chilling clarity. The Corbin legacy is not just history, it is here, it is watching, and it will not wait any longer. I wake in the darkness, drenched in sweat, the remnants of a nightmare clinging to me like a second skin. But this isn't a dream. The house around me hums with something ancient, and suddenly I am no longer alone in my own memories. The walls pulse with echoes of lives I never lived, visions of the firstborns who came before me, each scene brutal and intimate, as if I am watching through their own eyes. A girl, barely 10, gasps for air in a candle-lit room. I feel the tightness in her chest, the terror so raw it makes my stomach lurch. Then a boy, older, falls into shadow, his scream swallowed by a storm that rages outside his window. I stumble back, my hands gripping the banister for balance, but the house won't let me turn away. Each vision crashes into me, leaving me trembling, my heart hammering, my mind stretched between past and present. The air is thick with dust and cold, carrying faint whispers that brush against my ears. I feel the faint imprint of hands that are not mine, trailing down my arms, a pressure like invisible fingers trying to pull me into the rooms I cannot enter. I can hear the subtle creak of floorboards where no one walks, the sigh of the wind through the gables, echoing voices of children I have never met but whose fear is now mine. My chest tightens as I see the pattern, the repetition, the inescapable horror that binds these deaths together. The curse is not only about the taking of life, it feeds on emotion, on empathy, on the human spirit struggling against inevitable doom. Each scene leaves a residue, a shiver in my bones, a coldness that refuses to leave even as the visions fade. I stagger toward the window, trying to anchor myself in reality, but the reflection that greets me is unfamiliar, haunted. I realize the house is more than structure. It is memory, it is witness, it is predator, and now it is learning me, studying me, feeding off the emotions that ripple through me with every heartbeat. A whisper curls through the air, faint but unmistakable. You cannot escape. My pulse races, my hands shake, and I know that the past is no longer behind me. It is intertwined with my present, bleeding into my consciousness. The house has claimed me, body and mind, and the echoes of the past are only the beginning. As I sink to the floor, I feel the invisible weight of those who came before, pressing, demanding, reminding me that the Corbin curse is patient, eternal, and it is now feeding on me. The diary lies open on the desk, its yellowed pages trembling under my fingers. I can feel my heartbeat in my throat as I trace the jagged symbols scrawled across the page. They are unfamiliar, yet strangely compelling, like a language I almost understand, but fear to speak aloud. The words around them hint at a ritual, a chance to either end the curse or tighten its grip forever. I want to close the book, to run, but some invisible force pins me in place. The air in the room is thick and heavy, scented with old parchment and something darker, like scorched earth. Shadows dance across the walls as a single candle flickers, casting shapes that seem to move with intention. I hear my own breath, uneven, sharp, and behind it, almost drowned, a soft whisper, "Choose." My fingers tremble over the page, and I feel the pull of temptation mingled with terror. Could I really perform this ritual? And what would it cost me if I fail? The instructions are meticulous, precise, and horrifying. Every step seems to hum with a life of its own, as if the ink itself holds power, urging me forward. I glance around the silent house, feeling its gaze upon me. The whispers in the walls have grown louder, almost insistent, as if the Corbin estate itself is aware of my indecision. The candlelight catches on something in the corner, a fleeting shadow that disappears before I can focus, leaving a chill crawling up my spine. Fear clashes with a desperate hope. If I follow these steps, maybe I can break the pattern, save myself from the same fate as those firstborns whose lives echo through this house. But each line of the diary carries a warning in its delicate scrawl. Mistakes are fatal, hesitation deadly. I feel the weight of every decision pressing on my shoulders, as though the house itself is holding me accountable for what comes next. I take a deep breath, steadying my shaking hands, and glance once more at the cryptic symbols. The candle guttering, the smell of dust and cold stone, the silent, watchful walls, it all merges into a single suffocating awareness that nothing can be undone. Whatever I choose now will set the course for what happens next. And then, almost imperceptibly, a faint sound rises behind me, like the soft scuff of feet on the floorboards, a reminder that I am never truly alone in this house, that the past and present are entwined, and that whatever I do, the Corbin legacy is watching. It was the faint, hollow sound beneath my feet that gave it away. I'd walked that hallway 100 times, but tonight the boards felt different, almost empty beneath them. My pulse quickened as I knelt, running my hand along the edges of the warped planks until my fingers brushed a small metal ring. I pulled, and the floor groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. The air rising from below was cold and stale, smelling of earth and something far older, something that made the hair on my arms lift. I hesitated, staring into the pitch black, but curiosity gnawed at me harder than fear. I grabbed a lantern from the wall, its light flickering weakly, and began my descent. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space. The stone walls closed in tighter the deeper I went, and the air felt heavy, as if it were pressing against my chest. When I reached the bottom, my lantern illuminated a cramped tunnel stretching ahead. The walls were lined with shelves, and on them lay strange objects, tarnished silver cups, cracked dolls with missing eyes, and small boxes carved with symbols I recognized from the diary. I moved slowly, each relic seeming to hum with the weight of memory. Then I saw them. Along the far wall, half hidden in shadow, lay human remains, bones stacked in uneven piles, brittle and yellowed with age. My stomach twisted as I spotted the delicate curve of a child's skull resting atop the heap. The lantern shook in my hand, throwing restless shadows across the walls, and I thought I saw one of the dolls blink. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven. Then a whisper threaded through the darkness, faint but clear, calling my name. I spun, raising the lantern, but the tunnel behind me was empty. Still, I felt it. Someone was here, watching from just beyond the light. I took a step back toward the staircase, but my foot caught on something. I looked down and saw an old locket, its chain tangled in the dirt. I picked it up and opened it, revealing a tiny portrait of a young boy with the same eyes I'd seen in the old family paintings. The name etched inside was one I knew too well. The air grew colder, my breath clouding in front of me. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, something shifted, a soft scrape of movement. And I realized the passage wasn't just a resting place, it was a waiting place. It started as a flicker in the corner of my eye, a dark shape, gone before I could fully turn my head. I told myself it was nothing, just the mind playing tricks. But the longer I stayed in this house, the harder it became to believe that. Everywhere I went, I felt it, that weight behind me, close enough that the air seemed to thicken. At night, I'd hear the faint shuffle of feet against the floorboards, a slow, deliberate pace that stopped the moment I moved. My skin prickled constantly, as though invisible fingers hovered just above it. One evening, as I passed the old drawing room, I saw it again. Not just a flicker this time. An unmistakable silhouette standing behind the heavy lace curtain. The fabric swayed slightly, though the windows were shut tight. I froze, my breath shallow, watching the outline shift, almost leaning toward me. But when I yanked the curtain aside, there was nothing, only the empty window and my own reflection staring back. After that, it became relentless. I'd catch its form in the hallway mirror, a step behind me, only for it to vanish when I turned. In the kitchen, the shadow stretched across the tiles, though there was no source for it. Even in daylight, I could feel its gaze following me from room to room. Sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed, the covers pulled to my chin, and hear the faint rustle of the curtain in the corner. Every instinct screamed at me not to look. Some nights, I swore I could feel the mattress dip, as if someone had leaned over me. My heart would pound so hard it hurt, but my body refused to move. The worst was the night I finally gathered the courage to confront it. I stood in my bedroom, the lamp casting a weak glow, and stared at the curtain. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Before I could touch the fabric, a shape moved behind it, tall, impossibly thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The curtain swelled outward, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. My breath caught, the lamp flickered, and the room sank into shadows. I stumbled back, and in that instant, I saw a hand, long, dark, and wrong, slip from beneath the hem. When I turned the light back on, the curtain was still empty. But I know I'm not alone, and I'm starting to think it doesn't need the curtain anymore. The first letter arrived on a night when the wind was howling through the chimney. I found it slipped beneath my bedroom door, the paper yellowed and brittle, the handwriting jagged as if scratched in haste. It wasn't addressed to me by name, but I knew it was meant for me. The words were shaky, uneven. They spoke of watching eyes, of doors that lock themselves, of dreams that leave bruises. At the bottom was a single signature, just a first name, faded and almost illegible. I didn't recognize it, but I felt it, like the name itself carried weight, a presence. The second letter came 2 days later, folded so many times it was soft at the creases. This one was different. The tone was pleading. The writer begged me not to make the same mistakes they did. They warned me about the house, about the curse. Some lines were underlined so hard the paper tore. I traced the ripped edges with my finger and realized my hands were trembling. They kept coming, one after another, each from a different firstborn, each voice echoing with its own fear. Some were angry, lashing out at the unfairness of it. Others sounded resigned, as though they'd accepted their fate long before the ink dried. And every letter ended the same way, with a single line written in an unfamiliar script, words I couldn't read. At first I thought it was some old language, maybe a code. But the more I stared at those strange symbols, the more my head began to ache, like the letters themselves were pressing into my skull. I started hearing whispers when I read them, faint at first, then louder, too many voices speaking at once, overlapping until I couldn't separate one from another. I tried burning one of the letters, thinking maybe it would break the connection, but as the paper curled in the flames, I swear I heard a scream, not from the fire but from inside my head. The next morning, the same letter was back on my desk, unburned, the edges cold to the touch. Now I keep them in a box under my bed. I don't know if that makes me safer or puts me closer to whatever they're tied to. But last night, a new letter appeared. The handwriting was my own, and the words, in that same strange script, were still warm, as if they'd just been written. I haven't slept in 3 days, maybe 4. Time is slippery now, bending and twisting like the shadows that crawl along my walls. Every creak of the floorboards sounds like footsteps. Every whisper of the wind carries my name. At first I thought it was just exhaustion, the kind that makes your eyes sting and your mind blur. But now, I see things even when I blink. Faces in the corners, watching me with hollow eyes. Hands reaching from the dark, only to vanish when I jerk my head toward them. The worst are the mirrors. I can't trust them anymore. My reflection lags behind, its mouth moving a fraction too late, its eyes just a little too empty. Last night, I swear it smiled at me when I wasn't smiling. My heart never slows down. It hammers in my chest, a constant reminder that I'm still here, still trapped. I tell myself it's just the curse, twisting reality around me. But a small voice in my head whispers that maybe it's not the house at all. Maybe it's me. The letters from the firstborns lie scattered on the floor where I dropped them days ago. I can't bring myself to read them again, but I can hear their voices anyway. Overlapping, echoing, sometimes shouting so loud I have to cover my ears. They call me by name now. They tell me things I don't want to hear. They tell me I've already started becoming one of them. I catch my own voice, joining theirs sometimes, low and broken, like I'm speaking in my sleep. Except I'm not asleep. I'm never asleep. Tonight the air feels heavier, pressing down on me until my chest aches. The lights flicker, stretching the shadows until they seem to lean toward me. I know I should move, run, do something, but my body won't respond. It's like the house is holding me in place, waiting. Somewhere deep in the hallway, I hear slow, deliberate footsteps, not the creak of the old floor settling. These are heavier, measured, coming closer. My mouth is dry, my vision tunneling, but I force myself to stare into the dark. When the steps stop, I realize I'm no longer alone. There's breathing, deep and steady, inches from my ear. I turn, but there's no one there. Just my reflection in the hallway mirror, smiling again. This time it doesn't stop. The diary lies open on the desk, its pages trembling under the faint draft from the cracked window. My hands are shaking too, but not from the cold. The words on the page stare back at me like an open wound, raw and impossible to ignore. It's not just another story from the firstborns. It's a command, a ritual. It claims to end the curse. But the steps are stained with blood. Not metaphorical blood, real blood. Mine, or someone else's. The candlelight dances across the ink, making it seem alive, like the diary is breathing. The instructions are simple enough to follow, but the cost is what freezes me in place. If I do this, I might save myself. I might even break the cycle for good. But it means spilling life into the same ground that has taken so many before me. My heart feels too loud in the silence. I can almost hear the house listening. In my mind, I see their faces. The firstborns, all the ones who wrote their warnings before disappearing into history. They're not just memories. I've felt them, heard them. Some begged me to find a way out. Others warned me to let the curse be, to avoid feeding it with more blood. Now I understand why. I trace my finger over the last line. It says the choice must be made before the next moonrise. I glance at the window. The night is already slipping away. There's a knife in the drawer. I've seen it before, an old thing with a dark, tarnished blade. It feels heavier than it should when I hold it. The diary says the ritual works only if it's done with intent, with full acceptance of what it means. The air grows thicker, almost choking, as if the walls are leaning in, eager to know what I'll decide. My reflection in the window looks pale and distant, like it's already fading. I think about what it would mean to surrender, to stop fighting, to let the curse take me as it has all the others. Maybe then, at least, the struggle would be over. But if I walk away from this, I might be walking away from the only chance I'll ever have. I close my eyes and grip the knife, feeling the cold bite of the metal against my skin. Somewhere in the dark, I hear the faint sound of breathing that isn't mine. I think it's Stats waiting for my answer. The scream comes at 2:17 in the morning. It isn't the kind of sound you can mistake for anything else. It's raw, sharp, like the tearing of fabric and flesh all at once. It starts far away, deep in the mansion's bones, and then it travels, echoing through the halls until it's everywhere at once. I freeze in bed, my breath caught halfway in my throat. The air feels charged, almost electric, as if the walls themselves are trembling. I know what it is. I don't want to believe it, but I know. The firstborn Sep's cry. It's been written about in the diary more than once. Each description was different, but all agreed on one thing: it meant the curse was no longer sleeping. The sound comes again, this time closer, dragging out into a long, mournful wail. I can hear layers in it: fear, pain, rage. It's not just a voice, it's a chorus of them. Generations of firstborns crying out at once, their voices tangled together in a grief that feels endless. My feet hit the floor before I can think, and the wood is ice cold beneath me. I follow the sound down the hallway, my hand trailing along the wall for balance. The air smells faintly of smoke, though there's no fire, only shadows that seem to stretch and curl as I pass. Every step I take feels heavier, as if the house is pressing me down. At the top of the staircase, I stop. The sound is coming from below now, rising through the grand hall like steam from boiling water. My chest aches with each cry, my mind flashing with images of those who came before me, their faces pale and hollow-eyed, their hands reaching out in warning. I feel their loss, like it's my own. Maybe it is. Maybe the curse has already begun stitching their fate into me. The wailing stops suddenly, replaced by silence so thick I can hear my own heartbeat. The quiet is worse than the scream. It's expectant, watching, waiting. I take one more step down, and the floorboard groans under my weight. From the darkness below, something whispers my name. It's not loud, it's not even threatening. But it's the same voice I've heard in my dreams, the one that always comes just before I wake in a cold sweat. Only now, is not dreaming, and this time, it sets closer. The air is so heavy it feels like I'm breathing water. My candle shakes in my hand, the flame stretching thin before snapping back. They sit here. I can feel them. The hall ahead is darker than the rest of the mansion, as if the shadows are thick enough to hold shape. My footsteps are muffled, like the house itself doesn't want to wake what waits inside. I've read about this night in the diary. Every firstborn who dared to face them never walked away unchanged. Some didn't walk away at all. But I can keep running. When I step into the drawing room, the air drops in temperature so fast my skin prickles. The candle sputters, casting brief flashes across the walls, and I see them. They're not solid. Not entirely. Faces pale as bone, eyes hollow and dark, hovering just beyond the reach of light. There are dozens, maybe more, their outlines swaying like smoke caught in a slow wind. Some look at me with grief, others with rage. The voices start low, a whisper that seems to come from all directions. My name slips between their words, pulled apart and stitched back together by tongues that sound almost human. I force myself to speak. My voice cracks. I tell them I want to understand. I tell them I want to end this. At first, there's no reaction. Then one of them drifts forward, her features sharpening. She can't be older than 17. Her lips move, and her voice cuts through the others, clear, cold. The curse began with blood, she says, and it will only end with blood. Not just any blood, the blood of the one who carries the weight of the line. Her words hit me like ice. I know she means me. They close in, surrounding me. Faces twist, mouths opening in soundless screams that vibrate in my bones. Images slam into my mind, betrayals, murders, desperate bargains made under moonlight. each ancestor's sin folding into the next until I see the thread that binds them all. The curse isn't just punishment, it's a chain, forged link by link from every choice they made. And now it's my turn to decide if I'll add another. The candle burns lower, and the faces begin to fade, retreating into the dark. The last thing I hear before the silence swallows them is a warning. Choose right, or you soul join us. When the light dies, I realize the room is empty, except for the shadow that still stands behind me. The walls are groaning again, like the house knows what I'm about to do. My hands are shaking so badly the chalk snaps in half as I try to draw the circle on the floor. The instructions from the diary are burned into my mind. Each word feels heavier now, as if they weren't just meant to be read, but obeyed. I place the candle at the center, light it, and whisper the first line. The air shifts instantly. The smell of rot seeps into the room, thick and sour, clinging to my throat. The shadows in the corners swell, pulsing like they're alive. Something slams against the wall upstairs, then another hit. Closer. Footsteps echo overhead, too many to count, but none of them human. I keep speaking. My voice is trembling, but I force the words out, syllables that taste like rust on my tongue. The floor vibrates under me. The flame bends sideways as if some invisible breath is trying to put it out. Glass shatters behind me. I don't turn. If I look away from the circle, I know I'm done. The cold is unbearable now, needling my skin like ice water pouring over me. The whispers start low, hundreds of voices all at once, weaving together into something almost like language. My name is in there. They're calling me, coaxing me to stop. I grip the chalk until it digs into my palm and finish the final line of the incantation. The ground beneath the circle splits, just a hairline crack at first, then widening. Light pours through it, blinding white that burns my eyes. The voices turn to screams, high and furious. Shapes rush toward me from the walls, from the floor, from the very air, faces twisted in rage, claws outstretched. The house fights me with everything it has. The doors slam shut, the windows explode inward, glass raining down around the circle. The floorboards writhe under my knees like something alive is trying to throw me off. I don't stop. I can't stop. I shout the last words, every bit of air in my lungs pouring into them. The light erupts. A burst so violent, the world goes silent. The cold vanishes in an instant. The shadows are gone, but I am alone in the circle. But the house is still standing, and somewhere deep inside its walls something is breathing. At first I think I've gone deaf. The air is so still it feels wrong, like the house is holding its breath. The candle in the circle burns steady now. No flicker, no struggle. I step out slowly, half expecting the shadows to lunge for me again. Nothing moves. The floor doesn't creak under my feet. My heartbeat sounds too loud in my ears, every step echoing down the empty halls. The cold that had wrapped itself around me for days is gone, replaced with a strange, heavy warmth that clings to my skin. I pass the grand staircase. The portraits lining the wall stare down, their painted eyes flat and lifeless now. No more shifting glances. No more subtle, knowing smiles. The silence presses harder, like it's trying to convince me it's peace. The air smells faintly of smoke and dust. I run my hand along the banister, and for the first time, the wood feels solid, real, no vibration beneath it. Room by room I search. The library stands exactly as I left it, the diary closed on the desk. In the dining room, the long table is bare. No phantom feast. No place settings for the dead. Relief swells in my chest, but it's a fragile thing. Every time I turn a corner, I brace for something to be waiting, an open door that should be closed, a shadow where there's no light source, the faint sound of breathing just behind me. But there steps nothing. I reach the nursery. The crib is empty. The rocking chair stands still in the corner, no longer swaying on its own. My throat tightens as I step inside. For a moment, I let myself believe it's over, that I've finally broken it. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that the silence isn't absence, it's waiting. It's the kind of quiet you hear in the woods before a storm, where every leaf and branch holds still because they know what's coming. I pause in the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. My reflection in the glass of the window looks pale, drawn, older somehow. Somewhere deep inside the walls, far enough that I can barely hear it, there's a sound, faint, almost like the slow, steady beat of a heart. The warmth around me suddenly feels less like comfort and more like something breathing against my skin. The house doesn't fight me anymore, but it doesn't let me go easily either. Every step toward the front door feels like I'm wading through the weight of 100 years. The air smells faintly of old wood and something sweeter, like wilted flowers left too long in a vase. I keep glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see them, those pale faces from the portraits, watching me with that quiet, knowing grief. The rooms are empty now, but emptiness here doesn't mean absence. The walls remember. I can feel it in the way the floorboards give slightly under my feet, in the faint whisper of drafts curling through the hallways. Even the light coming through the windows feels touched by memory, dim and gold, like the house is holding on to its last hour before dusk. I think about the Corbin name, how it carried more than just wealth and land. It carried the weight of choices made long before I was born. Betrayals that turned to curses, grief that fermented into something darker. I came here chasing answers, thinking maybe I could untangle the knots in our history. But some knots aren't meant to be undone. Some just change shape when you pull on them. I passed the library one last time. The dust has already begun to settle on the shelves again, as if eager to erase all signs of my presence. In the grand dining room, I can almost hear the echo of silverware clinking, laughter that never belonged to the living. When I reach the main hall, I pause. My reflection stares back at me in the tall mirror by the door. I look older, thinner. My eyes carry something they didn't before, something I can't quite name. The key to the front door feels cold in my palm. I turn it slowly, hearing the lock click open with a sound that feels final. Outside, the air is sharp and clean, free of the thick, watchful stillness inside. But I don't feel free. Not completely. Some part of me is still in there, walking the halls, hearing the soft creak of the rocking chair, smelling that faint trace of flowers that should have rotted away decades ago. I step off the porch without looking back. The gravel crunches under my shoes, each step pulling me farther from the Corbin estate. But in my mind, I still hear the faint echo of footsteps behind me, and I can't tell if they're mine or theirs.